It's about a year since a student-led protest movement started and eventually ousted the former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. According to the UN, around 1,400 people were killed as Hasina's government unleashed a crackdown to crush the movement. Hundreds of protesters suffered bullet wounds after being shot, and many of them lost their eyesight. DW spoke with one such student who wants Hasina to face trial for what he calls crimes against humanity.
A shotgun pellet fired by the Bangladeshi security forces blinded the right eye of Mohammad Noor Hossain a year ago. This is the pellet that the doctors took out from his eye. Even now, his eye still hurts and itches constantly.
These were used to shoot at our bodies. These pellets were used to suppress and persecute us. It's painful even when a hair gets stuck in your eyes, and we struggled for 2 months with these pellets in our eyes.
Hossain was on the front lines of the protests last July. Like many, he was demanding an end to quotas that reserved sought-after government jobs for specific groups. It was at this protest on the 18th of July last year that he received his life-changing injury. His fellow protesters took him to the hospital, but it was too late to save his eye. Hossain was not the only one. Nearly 400 others were blinded during the student-led mass uprising that ultimately led to the ousting of the former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's government. The country's top court has since charged her with crimes against humanity. But Hasina has taken refuge in India and has called the case against her politically motivated.
This fascist Sheikh Hasina should be brought to this country and given a suitable punishment and trial.
Many people in Dhaka, especially students, consider toppling Hasina's government a big win for democracy. But they also claim that the changes promised by the interim government to improve institutions such as the judiciary, police, and the election commission have yet to be implemented. For its part, the interim government insists that it is making efforts to deliver on its promises.
So the government is now working with political parties and other institutions to ensure reforms. That many reform proposals, reforms already done. Some major reform issue is now on the board. The government and political party now in a very good momentum to ensure basic reforms like election system, constitution, and other bodies. Hopefully, within few weeks, these commitments from political parties and the government effort will be visible in people's eye.
But Hossain is also concerned about the interim government's lack of progress. He wants a government that will finally address everyone's needs and not just those of a select few.
I want freedom of expression in this country. The state system should be established in a way that allows everyone to speak up. Everyone will get their fair share, and there will be no obstacles to expressing their opinions. People will express their views freely, without any fear.
Despite severe injuries, Hossain hopes his sacrifices and those of thousands of Bangladeshis will not be in vain, and that they will finally get the justice they have waited for so long.
And joining me now here in the studio is Arafat Ahmed. He is an activist from Bangladesh. And I mean, you fled actually Bangladesh before the uprising. You've been back home, you've been back visiting the country in between. How do you feel today, and what's the mood back home?
Well, the mood back home is not very good. Quite recently, a couple of days ago, there was a plane crash in the capital city of Dhaka. And right after the crash, the response from the interim government was so lacking and so disappointing that the students from the school itself, who are, let's say, between the age of 14 to 18, had to protest the day after the crash for more accountability, more or better action from the interim government. Yeah, the mood is dire.
And I mean, last year, after the uprising last year, people lost their lives. Others, as we've just seen in that report, are still struggling with their injuries. It has put so much at stake, right? People, rather, they put themselves in harm's way. How do you see, has that made a difference for Bangladesh?
That's a really hard question. But the obvious answer is yes. We now have freedom of speech, which we didn't have, which was one of the reasons why I left Bangladesh in the first place in 2020, that I felt I had no freedom of speech. So one good thing could be mentioned is that now we're able to criticize the government, which we weren't able to do in the past. We are able to protest, which we weren't able to do in the past. But we don't want to protest. We just want whatever is right for us. We want justice, we want accountability, we want transparency.
Let's talk a little bit more about that justice. There was a UN report that was released recently, and I'd like to just read their classification of matters. They said that the brutal response by the former government was, quote, a calculated and a well-coordinated strategy. How do you see the prospect for former Hasina government officials being held accountable for the killing and the injuring of protesters?
Then I would say it would be naive to think it's going to be easy to prosecute any of them, because none of them are in the country anymore. Most of them have fled. All the top brass of the former regime has fled to different countries, mostly to India. Sheikh Hasina herself fled to India, and she is, I don't know, trying to coordinate her party members within the country and outside the country as well, via voice messages, via online messages, etc., etc. So she has absolutely no remorse. None of her party members have any remorse. They are in complete denial. They still think that the protest or the revolution, which we call...
But how about the mechanisms for accountability?
The International Crimes Tribunal is in full gear at the moment. For the first time ever in the history of Bangladesh, the International Crimes Tribunal is actually airing the court proceedings live on air, which has never been seen. So it brings more trust towards the International Crimes Tribunal from the public perspective. So as a citizen of Bangladesh, I see that the government is actually willing to prosecute, but to what extent is their capability is in question.
There will be elections next year. Is the country ready for that?
I think the country is ready. I think the millennials, the Gen Z, who are the new voters, like me, I was supposed to vote in 2020, which I wasn't able to vote, of course. So I'm looking forward to vote this time around. And thinking about the candidates that we have, I'm not very hopeful, to be honest. The candidates are not very, I would say, a good prospect, because the people of the country are good, the political leadership aren't that good. It's as simple as that.
What would it, have you ever thought, first of all, about moving back to the country, and what would it take for you to do so?
I talked about it last year. I talked about it here in DW as well. Post the revolution, when Hasina fled, I was really hopeful. I actually gave job interviews back in my country to go back there. But it's like the same old system in a new shell of interim government. Everything went back to the same. The bigger political party took over the corruption, extortion rackets of the former regime. It's all back to the same stuff.
Arafat Ahmed, a student activist from Bangladesh, thank you so much for joining us to share your experiences and your view.
Thank you very much.
And for more on this, let's bring in Sara Hossain. She's a lawyer with a focus on human rights and also an advocate at the Bangladesh Supreme Court. She joins us from Dhaka. Sara, from your point of view, has Bangladesh made any real progress towards accountability since that revolution?
Yes, there definitely have been steps towards accountability. Last year, the UN conducted a fact-finding mission here, in which they found that over 1,440 people had been killed during these same few weeks last year in July and August. Their report, I think, brought forward a lot of evidence, including about the direct leadership of the former Prime Minister and the directions given by her in conducting many of these killings. We've seen legal processes initiated to seek accountability. There are many challenges and many concerns which we're debating nationally, and I think also problems with that process, but the processes have begun. We've also seen action taken abroad to seize the illegally gotten wealth of many of those involved with the past regime. Extraordinary figures like 170 million worth of property in the UK owned by one minister, which has now been seized. And I think we also have to remember that it's not just what happened in July and August, but many years of gross human rights violations, disappearances, extrajudicial killings, arbitrary detentions and torture, and weaponization of the judiciary to bring false cases against members of the opposition and members of civil society. We're seeing that some of those are now being rolled back. In these cases from the past, the judiciary is being able to operate more freely. We're also seeing that many of these false and harassing cases are being withdrawn by the current government. And those are also, I think, important processes towards accountability. Much more needs to be done, clearly.
Now, Sheikh Hasina remains in exile in India, calling the charges against her politically motivated. From a legal standpoint, how difficult will it be to bring her back?
I think that the concern is she's living in India. We need cooperation from the Indian government. But there are also challenges here because, of course, the International Crimes Tribunal, which is considering cases, which has got cases against the former Prime Minister, still provides for the death penalty, as does our ordinary law. Of course, India also provides for the death penalty, so that can't be a barrier in itself for them not to return her to this country. I think that is a genuine concern for many. And I think but I think the more important issue is that we've seen the complete lack of remorse in the statements by Sheikh Hasina and many of the leaders of her party and supporters of her party. Total denial, total construction of an alternative reality, and massive disinformation campaigns online in Bangladesh and beyond about what happened here in July and August and prior, and also about what is happening now. We're in a very difficult transitional situation where we're seeing examples of many examples of reprisal and retaliation against members of the former government and their supporters. But we need that to stop. We need to be in a transitional process where we move towards truth, accountability, justice, and reparations for victims. But the actions taken by Sheikh Hasina and many of the leaders of her party, as I said, of total denial of their responsibility and culpability, are acting as a massive block to us moving forward in that process.
So to keep moving forward, briefly if you can, what needs to happen next?
Step one, I think we need the Awami League and its supporters to step forward and acknowledge and engage honestly with what the findings are that have so far been made. They're not findings made by the interim government. They're not findings made by partisan people inside Bangladesh political parties or elsewhere. They're findings made by the United Nations based on evidence, based on hundreds of interviews and gathering of open source investigations and so on. So there has to be an acknowledgement of what has happened here. We have to enter a process of speaking the truth about a history of persecution, harassment, violations against members of different political parties, different communities. And we have now to, I think, in the next 6 months, take a very deep breath and work on the really urgent reforms that are ahead of us. That includes reform of the police and security forces, and it includes urgent reforms of the justice system, where we're seeing, unfortunately, too many bad practices of the past being repeated. People being denied bail, held in detention for months on end, people who've had backgrounds in journalism, lawyers, members of civil society, as well as members of the former government, who are simply being held for months on end in jail, even though investigations are still proceeding after 10 months. Many cases where there's no real evidence against them, but they're not being released on bail. These are really bad practices. So in the past, we're seeing them continue. If we see some changes happening in these processes, as well as real commitment to police and security sector reform, I think we'll know we're on the way forward.
Sara Hossain, the advocate at the Bangladesh Supreme Court, thank you very much.
Thank you.